guests on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I should say. I'm Sandy Fischler. I am a senior program manager here at Build It Green. I run the home upgrade program, so it's all my fault. A little bit of housekeeping. Please put your phones on silent for the next 3 hours. Anybody whose phone rings during one of Leif's presentations, we're going to call your parents to come bring you home. So I think you know most everybody in the room. You know Leif Magnuson from PG&E. Molly Kawahata, PG&E, and Tessa also from PG&E. They're going to be handling the bulk of the presentation, and Torsten Glidden from Build It Green is going to be handling another part of it. So we're going to go fast today. We're going to take some breaks for Q&A, and we especially want to make sure that you know that we are recording this. It's going out live right now. It'll be available on the website next week in case any of your people were not able to be here today. So we have invited you here today because we have a problem. And we have to make a program change. And in the past, we have tended to club you over the heads with the program change and kind of say like it or leave it. And we don't want to do that this time. You are partners with us in executing this program. You have invested enormous amounts of time and money and sweat and equity, and we appreciate that. And at the same time, the ratepayers of PG&E have invested in you through Build It Green in training and support and FQC and desktop review. So there's this enormous investment, and we want to treat you as partners as we go into making this program change. And we're going to start that off by explaining to you what we're up against, what the results look like, and the task in front of us. So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Leif Magnuson, and I present to you our contractor base.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Sandy. So Sandy's right. With your help, over the last 8 years, we've built a really solid foundation in the state for home performance that didn't exist before. I was with EPA before I went to work for PG&E, and I oversaw the Home Performance with Energy Star program, and that was the only thing going across the state. We did about 40 to 50 retrofits, and that was it. And then the stimulus money came down, and we had an opportunity to stand up this new industry in the state. And you guys We're partners in that. You jumped in with both feet. Many of you have employed, several people on your staff over the years to help make this work. So, as I say, we've got a great foundation. But what I'm going to show today is that there's room for improvement, and we need your help to do that. So we're going to present to you today a proposal for how we think we can improve the program, but we're very much seeking your input before we finalize our proposal. So, advance the slide there. Have I got control?
Should.
So it's my top left.
You think?
Is it top left or top right?
It's this.
Okay.
Yeah, there you
Okay,
go.
great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so just to go over the agenda real quickly. So I'm going to show the 2016-2017 Advanced Home Upgrade Program results. I'm going to talk about the role of home retrofits in meeting some of the state goals. Torsten's going to present the proposed program redesign and we're going to have a discussion about that. And then we've got a mini training by Dan Perunco on the high performance HVAC installation standards. And then we'll finish up. I'm going to talk a little bit about residential pay for performance and give you an update on where that is. So let's first talk about 2016 and 2017. What's that?
You can see it right here too.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Point it where? Oh, over there. Okay, all right. Now we're moving. Okay, so these are the results from 2016, 2017. What it shows here is the very top is that we've done 2,500 plus projects in the program. You can see in the heat map over on the right where those projects have been done. Obviously, quite a few in the Bay Area, a smattering around Sacramento, a bunch out in the valley between Modesto, Merced, Fresno, and then a few in the southern parts of the valley and out at the coast. But over here, the 985 number shows how many electric meters there were in that population, and then the gas meters are over on the right. Below that, 564 is the annual kWh savings. And this is the metered savings. So the actual savings, average per home actual savings in the program, 564 kWh and 67 therms over to the right of that. So below those two numbers, however, is where the problem lies. The software has been predicting a much greater savings than we're actually getting in the program. And so from a ratepayer perspective, we're paying incentive based on that amount, and obviously we're paying way too much. So we have to do something about that. That's part of the reason we're here today. Below that shows what is the actual realization rate. So for electricity, it's 21% of the predicted savings is what we're actually getting, and for gas, 29%. So the models are over-predicting by, what is that, 79 and 71%. And then over to the right of that shows the percent site savings. 6.6% we're saving on average per site for electricity and 11% for gas. So obviously there's a couple of things we have to do. We have to improve the use of the models so that they're not over-predicting. We'd also like to increase the savings in the program. And if we do both of those things well, we can bring these numbers much closer together. Any questions on this quickly before I jump off this slide? Okay, fairly self-explanatory. So let's move from that to this. So why does this matter? And why is PG&E under so much pressure to balance out this equation, to get high energy savings? Well, we're held to something in California called the cost effectiveness. And there's two tests for cost effectiveness. One is called the TRC, that's a total resource cost test, and the other one is the PAC, or Program Administrator Cost Test. I'm going to talk mostly about the TRC because it's really the one that is primarily used to judge the utility programs. And if we have a TRC greater than 1, then it's safe to say that we can probably keep that program going for a while. If it's less than 1, everyone's taking a very close look at that program to see if it can be replaced with something else. And the TRC is really just very simply a benefit over cost calculation. So if you can increase the benefits up in the numerator there, you're better off in decreasing your costs down in the denominator. And I also wanted to break that out a little bit to show you how the TRC is calculated. The top part there, the benefits, is calculated by figuring out what the avoided costs are from electricity and gas savings. So what costs are we avoiding? There's obviously the cost to purchase all of that. And then there are societal costs like more greenhouse gas emissions, and those get factored into that equation as well. And then down below are the costs, the program, the monetary costs. So we had administration, marketing, implementation costs. EM&V stands for evaluation, monitoring, and validation. That's 6% of all costs in the state are set aside for that. And then we've got some other costs there, including what's called free riders. And there's always an assessment of our programs of who was planning to do this stuff anyway, and we just gave them money for free. Like they were planning to do it anyway. And then there's some measures costs incurred by non-free riders. So the measured costs are what did the customer pay in total? And retrofits are running around $20,000. So that's a pretty high cost. You put that in the denominator of the equation, that really counts against us. We've been pushing back on the PUC to say, hey, not all of those costs are energy related. About half of those we think are non-energy benefits. People are doing this for comfort and for resale value of the home and other things. So we're pushing back on some of these costs to get something that we feel is more accurate and representative of the program. But we're still very challenged by some of this. And I want to focus on the top part of the equation here and talk about benefits for a moment. So we mentioned the avoided cost for gas. And what's been happening over the last 13, 14 years is that natural gas prices have fallen pretty considerably, and that's because of fracking. Natural gets much cheaper to get natural gas out of the ground, so we're paying a lot less for it. So when we've saved natural gas, we're not getting the benefits that we used to be able to get. So it's more challenging for us to get a TRC above 1. And then let's look at the electric side of the equation. These are the components of electric avoided cost. What you see here is there's a whole bunch of things that factor into the cost of electricity on any given hour of the day across the year. And frankly, at any given hour of the day, in any day in the year. And during the summer months, there's obviously a huge peak load, right? As the temperatures get hotter and air conditioners are kicking on, everybody comes home from work, they turn on their lights, they start the dishwasher, they turn up their AC. And on those really, really hot days of the year, PG&E pays a premium for electricity. And we can foresee some of that, and we have to bid in against other utilities in the Western grid for some of those resources and have those held and set aside for us. And so we pay kind of a premium for that. And then if there's a day that we didn't predict and it's super high and the temperature's gone way up, we have to pay day ahead, sometimes hour ahead market prices for that, and it's extremely expensive. So that's what you're seeing here is that when you look at what those costs are across the year, they're pretty low during the middle of the day when the solar is on. And then at the end of the day, as the solar goes offline and we have to start purchasing power from other sources, it gets very, very expensive. So the take home from this is, if we can reduce through energy efficiency the demand in the afternoon, especially during the summer months, then we increase our avoided costs and we have a much more favorable TRC. And it turns out when you look around at who's capable of doing this in the state, it's you guys. There's nobody else out there working on AC and reducing load in a home to reduce that peak demand in the afternoons. That's mostly coming from residential. If you think about industrial or commercial or agriculture, they're kind of either running steady throughout the day or they're running more during the day when their crews are there working and then less at night. So this is really largely responsible, residential is largely responsible for this peak. So that really gets to your role in all of this. And how we design this program is extremely important to whether or not we can provide that service and reduce that demand at those times of day. To the extent you guys do more of these jobs, you do better quality jobs, we can reduce this peak demand. And how have we been doing? So over on the left shows that peak demand. So what you see on the left here is a demand curve, and there's 4 months that they grabbed from 2015. And you can see where the demand goes high in the afternoon hours. And over on the right-hand side are the results from our program, the Advanced Home Upgrade Program. And that's not a demand curve, that's a savings curve. So when are you guys actually getting savings during the day? And it's broken out into the 12 months of the year. And you can see that for the shoulder season months, there's not a lot of savings there. And not a lot of savings for the winter months, because we're looking at electricity here. But for some of the summer months, we're getting very good savings during that same window in the afternoon. And we can do better than this. We can even improve these load saving curves, and we will. And that's what we want to talk about today, are some ideas for how we might go about that, how we can work together to make that happen. Any questions on that?
We have a question here. The savings shown on the earlier slide for home or gross savings or net?
Yeah, so the slides that we've been showing are gross savings. So you may have heard these terms, gross savings, net savings. Basically, these savings from our program have not been compared to what they call market effects or what's been going on out there among all energy users in PG&E's territory. So it could be that all energy use is going down a little bit, and that's in fact been the case. So in order to make these numbers real, we have to compare that to what's been going on in non-participants' energy use. If it's been dropping a little bit, these numbers are inflated a little. And that's probably the case. But not to complicate things too much, what they do is they try to find a control group and they go study that control group. And they try to match that control group to our participants so they have similar characteristics. And that way we know that's a proper comparison group. And then you get at net savings. So what you're looking at here is gross savings once the comparison is done. And we also have to assess how many are free riders. That's just a nuance. Then we figure out what net is, and that's what PG&E can claim to the CPUC are actual savings from our program. Question?
Basic used to be included in the overall program, and then that was, I guess, recently taken out. These numbers reflect just advanced, or is it combined? Yellow basic and the advanced total?
Yeah.
To represent these numbers?
This is just the advanced program. We're going to show a slide a little bit later that shows the results from the home upgrade program. And I'll just say, the home upgrade program has been getting similar electricity savings, but not quite so good on gas. And their realization rates, they used a different tool entirely from the software, but the realization rates were better. Actually, that tool seemed to predict a little bit more accurately what the savings were going to be. So we'll talk about that more, because we're going to give you the option, actually, of using that tool if you don't want to use the software in the program anymore. So. But we'll get to that. Any other questions just on the data right now? Okay, so what are we doing? What are we planning to do to meet this challenge? I'm pressing the button. Okay, there it is. Okay, so first of all, the first thing we need to do is we need to reduce the overall customer incentive by 50%. To align more closely with the actual energy savings, those average realization rates. And we plan to do that by January 1st, 2019. Technically I should be cutting these by 70+%, but I don't want to do that much. but I need to do something radical. I need to be responsive. The CPUC wouldn't consider us to be responsible program administrators if we didn't react in some way to this. So that's what we're proposing, number one. Number two, we want to increase the software realization rates to 80% electric and 80% gas from the current realization rates of 21%, 29%. And we want to do that by roughly a year from now. And we need your help to do that. Third, we want to increase the average per home energy savings to 1,200 kWh and 120 therms from what it is currently, 564 and 67. And again, we want to try to do that by November 1st of next year. So we have pretty aggressive goals. And then finally, very important to us is ensuring the future PG&E program participation for high-performing contractors. So all of you who want to go there with us and grab that ring, become high-performing contractors. Some of you may be there or nearly there right now. But for all of you who want to be there with us, we want to ensure that there's future work through PG&E energy efficiency programs for all of you. So that's the general outline of our program redesign. Torsten's going to lead you through some of the details. Do feel free to ask questions as he goes, but there is time set aside afterward for a discussion of about 40 minutes in length. So we anticipate that there'll be some robust discussion at that point. So, Torsten?
Thanks, Blake.
Yep.
All right, so the first goal, to elaborate on it a little bit, again, reducing the overall customer incentive by 50% to align more closely with actual savings. We achieve this by taking the existing advanced home upgrade structure and simply applying a 0.5 modifier to all the savings that we capture. So there's the tier-based site savings. Is there a laser pointer on this? Oh, okay. There's a tier-based site savings, and then there's the kilowatt hours and therms. So out of the energy modeling, we get those two outputs, right? The tier-based site savings applies to the overall. It's basically the kilowatt hours and therms converted BTUs, and it's the whole savings for the site. And then we take and add incentives to the kilowatt hours and therms specifically, separately, and that gives you a total savings for the project. So if most of you are familiar with this, all we're proposing is to cut that in half using the 0.5 modifier. So it should be pretty simple to see and understand, and potentially, it's not so much about communicating it to customers, because what you communicate is a total incentive, which will already have been modified at that point, right? We're going to do this, we're targeting the beginning of the year. Oh, yeah, it might. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Just what happens, it's effective January 1st?
Yes.
What happens if you've got a job that's already got like a notice to proceed in the month of December, and it goes in?
I'll get to that in a minute, but basically you want to clear through that stuff by the end of November, so beginning, in December you want to clear through that stuff so you don't have anything else that's still in the approval process by the time we turn the clock over to January 1st. The software modeling tools stay the same, so just a quick image of, yeah, there is the laser pointer. Optimizer and Snug Pro on the right. Oops. So goal number 2, wow, very sensitive. Goal number 2 is to increase software realization rates to 80% for electric and for gas from the current 21% and 29% respectively by November 1st of 2019. So we're looking at a whole year to get to this point. But in order to do this, we've identified some tactics to try and get there. So what we want to see is that all the energy models submitted be calibrated. It's a feature haven't been utilizing fully in the past. Some contractors do this already, but very, very few have taken advantage of this. And it is something we see as a tool to get us closer to actual savings from the predicted savings, right? So there's also some assumptions baked into the software modeling tools. And there are different ways to be out of prediction relative to actual savings. But one of those primary ways, is to make better assumptions about consumption based on a previous year's worth of customer data, right? So what we need is, for when you go out to a project site, to sign up the customer to use PG&E's Share My Data feature, which allows them to share their utility bill data with us. Then we calibrate the models for you guys. So what you get back after you submit it is a calibrated model with maybe some adjustments that need to be made, as some of you are familiar with in the QA desktop review process. But what we get is a closer approximation of the predicted savings relative to actual savings is what the goal is over time. We look to be able to be doing that by November 1st of this year. So what we want to see is that all the energy models become calibrated by that time. And if you have projects that you've submitted prior to that, by the end of December, we want to see uncalibrated energy models be through the desktop review process. And we can help, the QA review team will help communicate with you guys about what's, in process to meet that deadline and what needs a little help going along the way. But we'll negotiate that on a case-by-case basis. Generally speaking, though, that's your target. And once you turn it into us, we'll take the data shared with Build It Green through Share My Data and calibrate those models for you all. By the middle of the year, we're actually looking at potentially paying customers, and these are incentives to going directly to customers. An incentive based on the contractor's actual average realization rate. So tied to, right now it's being cut 50%, but there's a potential tied to the contractor's actual realization rate of getting more for your customer. So if your realization rate, your actual savings, is closer to predicted and higher than 50%, then you stand to get more for your customer. Those that are lower would get less potentially for the customer. So that's what we're targeting for the middle of the year. And then by the end of that look back period of trying to get to 80% realization rates on electric and gas, we want to see at least that contractors are getting the 50% realization rate, or they could be dropped from the program. So one of the options that Leif mentioned earlier to meet goal 2 is to actually, for those contractors that would be more comfortable using a simple tool and are not as interested in doing larger scopes of work, and not as interested in trying to get the customer to share their data, what we're looking at is potentially using the home upgrade calculator tool, because as he mentioned, it had predicted closer to actual savings over the course of the analysis period. It is a more conservative deemed savings-based incentive calculation tool. So it tends to be that the opportunity for incentives is lower. The thing only calculates out to about, no matter what you put into it, it only spits out about somewhere between 5 and 20% savings on any given project, regardless of, obviously the larger the work scope, the more you get, but it doesn't typically exceed 20%. So the savings up front for your customer is going to typically be smaller, but because it's predicting more accurately, especially with electricity, what we're looking to do is only cut the savings from the gas side, from the therm side, by 50% or 0.5 modifier, and then have the electric side of the savings be calculated at the, be calculated as normal. So it's not going to be affected. The modifier applied would be 1 to that, so it's a pass-through. So while the potential for getting a larger incentive for the customer is not there, it's a smaller incentive up front, the realization rate, at least on the electric side, should be much better. So it gives you a little bit more certainty or comfort in some cases to get to that point where you're managing customer expectations and you're not working quite so hard necessarily to get to realized savings that you might be with energy modeling tools. These are the results. So this is why we're proposing to not apply a modifier to the electrical side of the savings out of that home upgrade calculator tool, and then on the gas side it's right around 50%, so they align pretty closely. This is what the calculator tool looks like. Some of you may be familiar with this already. basically you come in and toggle some of the building details, single story, is it heating only or is it heating and cooling, et cetera. And then you select your scope of work down here. You tell it which measures you're installing. So that part would need to align with the scope of work. It's very similar to energy modeling software Q&A that you may be familiar with already. And then it spits out some kWh and therm savings as well as site savings for the whole project. So it's very similar end result in terms of the data we can base our incentives on.
And just before Torsten moves on, I just want to make clear, if you use that tool, you don't have to get the data, permission to get the data from the customer. It's one step in the process that you can avoid. If you continue using the approved software right now, you have to get the customer to provide their login information for PG&E's account, and then they can give permission to share the data with Build a Green.
Because
it's an extra step in the process for you that if you go to this tool, you won't have to pay.
Well, the customer does that.
What's that?
The customer doesn't share my data thing.
Yeah.
Yes, you can't. We have something called guest access. We made it a lot easier than it used to be. All they need to have is their account number and the phone number associated with their account, and then they can give permission to Build a Green to get the data. But it's still an extra step in the process. They have to, get their account number, they have to remember the right phone number. Maybe not that hard to do, but just something to consider.
Ideally, you'd be working with a tablet or something on site, so you can actually sign them in using that that URL right there and run them through the process right on the spot. We'll have some documentation that gives you sort of a step-by-step how-to on running through the process, but it's pretty simple. Yeah.
You can go there and do it online?
Yeah.
And we're looking at the account number, not the service agreement.
You need meter numbers.
Well, yeah, so account number, so for this guest login access, my understanding, this thing's supposed to be up and running and working pretty well. Account number, and then their phone number.
If you don't have internet service, we do have a paper form too.
I don't think service account. I don't know if their actual account number that's on there is the same thing as their service ID number. I don't think it.
Portion of it.
Yeah, we'll work on those. We'll make sure that the documentation specifically highlights those details you need to follow for that. Because with accounts, you can have multiple service addresses, whereas in service IDs, they serve a specific address. So someone could have a bill that comes with an account with multiple services on it for different buildings. So it has to be specific. And then as far as goal number 3 goes, we also want to, as you saw on the summary slide earlier on, increase the overall per home energy savings to 1,200 kilowatt hours and 120 therms, up from 564 and 67 respectively. Again, by this November 1st look back date, so the analysis period of approximately a little over a year. One of the tactics, or the primary tactic to get to that point that we've identified as helping us get there most effectively is to provide, training and a contractor incentive of $1,200 per project to meet the high performance HVAC installation standards. So what we know is that a lot of the systems that get installed tend to be not performing as well as they could be. And there are a number of reasons for that, a lot of which we'll go through in a little bit more detail here. But ideally, you've taken advantage of that incentive and on every project, doing a more, basically residential commissioning on your systems. So there's more measurement involved and there's adjustment as you go, and it's a bit of a change in the mindset of and approach of your sales folks and your installers. But it yields some really good results, and it's kind of a market transformation that we'd like to see occur, and we think will get us to this higher per home energy savings. Yeah,
Are you
quick
doing
question.
any follow-up with the high performance installations that have been done already?
We will be doing field verification on them as well. So does that answer your question?
No, I just talked to a homeowner yesterday that was involved in that. She wished that she had done something different.
We can talk offline and see what the specific details are. But yeah, we're always open to going back and taking a look at something and making sure that customer expectations were met and talking to contractors that were involved in the process. So
And
That's
just curious, not to drop that entirely. Was she specific about what she didn't like about it? Or?
I think she would have gone gas. I mean, she was all electric in the wintertime. She said her gas, but her electric was just too hot.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So this is something we'll be able to potentially offer starting October 1st. We want to, of course, in that process, make sure that everyone gets the training, that who are interested in following the standards gets the training they need to be able to do so. Because it's not a simple matter to achieve those standards. It really does take some training of sales staff to be able to communicate and be able to sell to the right identified customers, as well as the install staff and the install lead. They all need to be on the same page and be following through all the way through the process. So trainer Dan Paranco is in the building, and he will be presenting a sort of mini training for you on high performance HVAC installation shortly. The idea is that PG&E will cover the cost of contractors' investment in getting their staff trained up, 50-50 cost match, up to $4,000 maximum per contractor. And again, this will roll out beginning of October. And then we also want to have more of a feedback loop established with contractors. So providing quarterly feedback to contractors about their realization rates and their overall site savings, average site savings, is something we intend to do on at least a quarterly basis. We will have some initial feedback for contractors following the forum. Give us a couple of days to do that. So early next week, look for an email on that. That allows you not only to see your realization rate, but also gives you a link to follow up with and provide feedback on, ask questions about it. Yes.
Can you repeat the question for those on the webinar? And can you speak more into the mic?
Oh, yeah. So let me move a little closer. The question was specific to a customer who wanted to potentially do a different configuration on their system. So that question I don't think we need to get into here. It's more of an offline thing, but I'll try to repeat them into the microphone here. So the standards themselves, I'm not going to go through these in deep detail because Dan will be doing a little bit more detail on them shortly. But in effect, you have, for item number 1, you have equipment efficiency requirement to meet, and then for 2, it's more about downsizing the equipment that you could install on any given project, and getting for 3 the airflow up and the watts per CFM down. So making sure that you're maximizing the efficiency of the system. For 4, getting to at least 3% total duct leakage, but ideally effectively 0% duct leakage. And there are ways to do that, not the least of which is making the duct run short, fully extended, and run low, and then which also allows you to bury them in insulation. For 5, that's kind of the roll-up for performance on the AC projects. It's getting to 85% or better of manufactured performance tables on the delivered sensible year. And there's a spreadsheet that contractors will be able to use to take in all those measurements, and it delivers a value for that particular metric. And for item number 6, room air delivery, this is again a way to tell that the system is delivering comfort and running efficiently, so that the maximum deviation on temperatures and pressures are minimized. You obviously want your system static pressure to be as low as possible to meet all this. And then also ventilation, meeting ASHRAE 62.2 2010 California, and making sure that when you do those fans or centralized system is not consuming more electricity than it needs to deliver ventilation.
And you all should have picked up a copy of those standards and the data collection sheets when you came in.
As far as collecting the incentive goes, again, so training and mentoring is required so that you understand the expectations in greater detail for measurement and for data collection. Meeting all 7 of those performance specifications on the previous page. That documentation is available at homeupgrade.org currently. it should be, performing this measure should be included as a line item on a scope of work, right? Ideally with a specific measure cost set aside for it, although we don't want to get too much in front of your process. So as long as it's called out on the scope of work, that's sufficient. If it's part of a larger, package cost, fine. But it'd be great to be able to see that as line item, including the associated specific costs. That's good data. And then homes with an existing HC, again, are the primary target of this, although you can do homes that are heating only, but do contact Build It Green before you submit, so we're clear on all the expectations on that and which of those metrics you're going to focus on for that kind of project. Because obviously the delivered sensible EAR is not a metric you can use on those projects. So to collect that, the incentive measurement, there are requirements that include for the measure itself. You actually want to have an existing advanced home upgrade project. This will be something you can select within the contractor portal as an additional measure. And then once you select that measure, if you are an approved contractor, then you would add additional documentation that includes the spreadsheet that has all the measurement on it, any additional pictures, etc. The 7 specifications are something that will be QA'd along with that advanced home upgrade project by Build It Green's QA review team at 100% rate. So the current rate that we do for all the QA on each project. And then 100% FQC by Build It Green on the first 3 high-performance HVAC install projects to make sure everyone has got it nailed when they're out there in the field and doesn't need additional mentoring to brush up on anything specific. And then once you've achieved that, release it back to a 5% FQC rate, provided that all 7 specifications are being routinely met on each project. Question?
Yeah, don't you think that incentive's a little low for what really is happening in that requirement? That even if you incentivize guys to go for it, it would be better?
I think, I think the incentive isn't designed, so the question was, isn't it a little low for trying to achieve that kind of work? It's not designed to cover 100% of the costs associated with it. Initially, it probably will cost more to provide than $1,200 per project to provide that level of service on a project, but as it becomes a more regular thing and it gets operationalized, we see that cost per project dropping and it covering more of that cost.
I'm just curious, do you have a sense of what the extra cost would be?
Well, I would think that a contractor that's not doing that, you incentivize them high to try to get them to at least take a stab at it. Most guys that know anything are saying, you know what, I'm making money. That $1,200 is going to be a severe headache for me, and they're not even going to touch it. So put it up front high, get them to try to take that jump, see if they can, and then maybe you could back it down as they're, to get them the carrot to get them in.
And what goes into that cost? Because we're also providing incentive for training, and so we're hoping that helps offset some of those initial costs. But do you just think that the cost per site, going into the future, is more than $1,200?
Well, I think that's a big deal that you're asking contractors to do, and I think it's important. And I think if you could get more guys to kind of take the bait, then it makes more sense, and then they can get involved and maybe in the training that you're probably going to get guys that are doing really good work anyways, and why not try to get the other ones that are maybe on the fence? So,
do you have a sense of the range here, of what might get people off the bench?
No.
Okay.
But I think at least covering the extra operational cost makes sense. So that they can say, it's not going to cost me any more money to do this. Why not do this? As I'm stumbling through it, then we can reduce that, maybe they're in.
Okay. Thanks.
As far as the, yes, another question?
Are we going to go over some of the details of this? I was just wondering, because I just looking at it really briefly, I was just wondering about, like, for example, duct leakage. Sometimes, we have, ducts we cannot get to replace. How does that fit into this program? And also with, with the cooling capacities, like sometimes we can't use
Those are good. Those are good questions that were reserved for Dan coming up. And then as far as it interfacing with the program itself, we'll take that offline later. But yeah, he's going to get more into the specifics. You can ask him questions about some of the things you encounter on specific job sites, maybe in your area. As far as the high performance HVAC install measure is approved when Build It Green QA and FQC is passed. So do on these first 3 projects plan for a little extra time, manage customer expectations accordingly. Oops. So yeah, as far as the high performance HVAC install training goes, it is a significant time commitment. You're talking about for the sales staff a couple days of extra time, administrative staff potentially in the office, especially if they handle a lot of documentation and submitting documentation to Build It Green. And then the installation staff and the crew leads, more like 5 days at least. So it is something to make, think internally on, and you got to be committed to. You want to take the plunge, but we want to go there with you and help you do better work out there and collect an additional incentive in the process. The training must be completed prior to the rebate application submission. That is because, again, this is it's more involved than a typical install process. It is residential commissioning. It requires a lot of extra measurement and follow through and adjustment as you go, and it's well worth the experience. I've been out to a few of these, and we've had some contractors go through this already, and they actually, we have changed some minds. They actually go out and approach projects differently now because they've been through the process. And while they don't necessarily, probably because there hasn't been an incentive heretofore, but in some cases, not every customer is going to be a good candidate for this. They do approach, when they go in the door, every project from the idea that they want to offer this and they want to try to do this every time they go out, and they'll do as much of it as they can. So they are out there doing better work regardless of whether they're doing all 7 of those, meeting all 7 of those specifications. And then as far as the next step goes, if you're interested, you want to reach out to Build It Green. There's contact information right there. Schedule consultation and onboarding so we can discuss, again, in a little bit more detail what the process is like, and work on taking the next step, getting you in touch with Dan, and getting you scheduled for training. Any questions on that? All right, so to summarize, again, incentives are being reduced. As of January 1st, we're going to cut the advanced home upgrade out of the energy modeled software by 50%. You can potentially use the home upgrade calculator as an option, but we do want to get, either way, to 80% actual site savings by November 1st, 2019. Calibration will be available shortly, so that'll be part of the process ongoing for quality assurance. Contractors will be eligible after October 1st for the $1,200 incentive per project for high performance HVAC install, and the cost sharing of training for that process, for that service, is going to be available beginning October 1st as well.
Some kind of a minimum jobs per quarter you're expecting? I mean, if I go out and, right now I'm talking to, I get a call, I go out there and maybe 1 out of 10 people want to sign up, something like that. So if I'm hearing this right, I'm now reducing the incentive, the rebate. So instead of 5,000, it's going to be 2,500, and I'm adding a lot more administrative and stuff like that on my end. So how many, I can't keep going in business.
We actually feel like, besides the high performance HVAC install process, which allows you to do something entirely different and of a more impactful nature potentially for your customers, the process doesn't really change. The incentives do reduce a little bit depending on which tool you use, but the process is effectively unchanged for the time being. As long as you can get to the point where you're meeting realization rates to the proposed levels, then you can continue doing what you're doing now, but try and focus in whatever ways you can, and try. We want to go down the road of high performance HVAC install with everyone here if possible. And it's up to you to determine which customers are going to be good candidates for that. I mean, one of the things you want to do with any of these projects is actually make sure you pre-screen your customers so that you're sort of guarding your realization rates, if you will, because on projects where they want to add air conditioning, those aren't going to turn out well in terms of realization rates because there's a new consumption being added, right? So the energy modeling can't pick up on that correctly, and it's going to throw results off as far as actual savings realization rate goes.
Where does the training happen? Is that in Stockton?
Then the training is going to be on. It's very customized to each contractor, and basically you set up a time to go out to you have an in-house training for the sales staff, admin staff for a couple days, and get everyone on the same page, and then you go out and you pick a project and go out and actually do the measurement along with Dan, and fine-tune the system and get it designed correctly so it's delivering the best savings you can for that customer given the circumstances on that project.
Last question for that.
Yeah.
So all the manual J, D, S, and T,
Yeah.
all those are a requirement for each project?
Yes.
All right.
We've got a couple questions on the webinar.
I think we're at the blue one there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so there's a question, when would the performance or non-performance incentive tied to the 50% realization rate be paid to the customer or contractor? So I'm not quite clear on what they're asking. Effectively, the incentive, as of January 1st gets cut by half. There's no additional amount coming, but there was what we're looking to do by June in 2019 is tie the contractor's actual realization rate to the amount they can get for their customer. So they could get more than 50%. In other words, their incentive to their customer would be cut less, right? Or if their realization rate isn't quite 50%, if somewhere under, it would actually be cut slightly more. But by, again, November 1st, we want to see that all contractors are at least at the 50% level. So it's meeting what the adjustment is already doing as of January 1st. Hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to follow up if you have another question.
I have two questions. One is when you guys are doing the realization rate per contractor, how far back does the data go on that you'll be looking at?
It's a year back, and then the existing realization rates are actually historical data. So going forward, you'll be able to get stuff more in real time for the projects you work on.
Right, but since there's never been any kind of requirement or even conversation about matching realization to your actual design of your modeling, going back a year would be going past the point where now you're actually asking contractors to have realization rates. Do you find that unfair?
So I think that, we're taking, the realization rate comparison is on a per project basis. So there's unless you started something a year ago that you haven't finished yet, it wouldn't affect it, right?
Are you going to be doing it in the middle, like when you start doing that in March or April?
In June, yeah. So you have time to, and at least quarterly feedback in order to see what your realization rate, where it's trending.
But what I'm trying to say is in your program, like contractors are now going to, you give them this information, they say, well, okay, now I want to change my modeling to be more based on real life instead of how the whole program was modeled from the beginning, just do the models based on incentive. So I think it would be wise to use the point of actual, like now, give them the benefit of the doubt to say, let's start now and look at the realization rate later, as opposed to before there was even a conversation about it.
So obviously the point being raised here is that you need like a year of data after the intervention or retrofit of the home before you can calculate an accurate realization rate. And if we did that for a home that was finished, let's say next week, it wouldn't even be until end of September 2019 where we could actually do that. And yet we're saying June 1st, 2019, we're going to start pegging the savings to the realization rate that's there. So that's good input. We'll think about that a little bit more. I do want to also, for the contractors who to date have been using the tool, and getting good savings, and getting maybe above 50% realization rates, I would like to reward them in some way. It's true we haven't, made that a formal part of the program until now, but I do want to acknowledge that there are some people who, are using the tool and getting realization rates above 50%. And so, anyway, it's good input and it's something we got to think about a little bit more. But I appreciate that input. Another question? Take him the furry dice.
So I just kind of want to be clear. So you have the dollar per savings, which is your ratio dollar paid on incentive over savings, right? That's your main TRC. So you're going to reduce the dollar by half, right? So it'll be half of the dollar. And then the savings you want to increase by 4, right? So your actual ratio is not going up, right? It's going to go up like by 8.
So the costs that you're referring to is the incentive cost, and that's in the bottom part of the equation. So
Savings per dollar.
yeah. Yeah.
You're going to reduce the cost going to the homeowner, which is fine. I'm not arguing that or anything. But then the actual savings part you want to increase by 4, which is a factor of 8 at that point, right?
And that's in the numerator. That's in the top of the equation. So if that goes up, that's good. And if the denominator goes down, that's good. So
okay.
It's working in the direction we want it to.
Yeah, it's just kind of a double whammy there, right?
I think this is it's an ongoing process that we need to work through together, and we're going to be, again, providing regular feedback, and we want to, keep analyzing as we go. Now that we have software modeling tools that can output the data and we can make comparisons with actual savings, we have the ability to take a more proactive approach, provide feedback along the way, and something more similar to real time, and make course corrections more often.
I get it. I guess it's just a mathematical thing I'm dealing with here. So, like, if right now you had 100% realization rate for the amount of dollars you have now, would that be a successful program?
It might be. The TRC is always in play here, and there's a lot that goes into the TRC. The realization rate is just one component of it.
Well, no, but if you just changed that and you looked at your full output, like, would that be success? Would you be able to sell that? Is that a good TRC? I guess.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. And so there's a couple of things in play here, and I'll touch on this at the very end. But basically, in order for us to keep this program alive, I've got to keep the TRC high. The other thing is, from a ratepayer perspective, those who are looking over our shoulders, and there are a lot of interveners who carefully examine our programs to make sure that we're not overpaying and misusing ratepayer funds, want to see that we're not providing an incentive that's way, way higher than the actual savings that we're getting. And the TRC accounts for that, but the realization rate is pretty obvious when they see that, how much more we're paying than we probably should be. And then the third thing is, back to this point about when are we getting savings? The one thing that is keeping our program alive is that we're getting savings in that late afternoon when they're most needed. And so that's in our favor. And as I say, there's nobody else out there who can do that, who's working on residential HVAC systems. So it's a combination of all those things that kind of keeps our program alive. And if we can improve all of those metrics, then we can assure our future.
Yeah. Just to ask then, what was the time frame for the program not staying alive or going away if those numbers are not met?
So the question was, what was the time frame for the program staying alive if the program metrics aren't met? A little bit hard to say. A couple of things here. One is, in 2013, the Public Utility Commission made a commitment to you as contractors that they would keep the program going for 10 years to 2021, I think. 2023. Sorry.
It was 10 years from 2011, but...
it was 10 years from 2011?
I think so. Maybe it was 10 years from 2012, though.
Okay.
Memory's a little foggy on that.
Yeah. So So point is, we want to have a program available for you to get to participate in the rebate programs in doing whole house retrofits. Whether that program looks exactly like the one in 2011 or the one today, that wasn't a commitment that anybody made. So we're changing the program to try to keep it alive. What I'm trying to do is at the same time, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, that we're changing the Advanced Home Upgrade program. We've also got a pay-for-performance programs that have come online recently and are going to be increasing in their activity over the next 3 years. And we have made commitments. I've signed contracts recently with several vendors who are going to be running those programs. 3 of the 4 of those vendors are doing HVAC work. So they will be looking for contractors to participate in those programs. And so again, whether the commitment to you of providing incentives to do home performance upgrades is in the form of the Advanced Home Upgrade program or some other program, we have made that commitment and we will follow through on that commitment. But I think just to underscore one thing, I think though that what we're asking of you is higher performance in the program. And so I don't think anybody should have the expectation they can participate in the program and do lousy work and get no savings. I mean, that's not realistic. But if you want to participate in the program and you want to get good savings and do good quality work, then we think there's a big future for you. And as I say, the driver is trying to get reducing those peak savings in the afternoon. That's going to be something that PG&E is going to be incentivizing for a long time.
Well, I have a question about, I guess, the realization, just with, factors. I was going through like some of my clients in the queue or in the past, you have people who are doing additions. At the same time, you have people who are adding electric vehicles. There are people adding solar,
Remodels,
just et cetera. So those numbers would skew our realization, which would, looking at it from what I see,
Yes.
that I should, as a contractor, tell them not to be a part of the program because it's going to mess up my numbers, which would kick me out potentially as a program, make your numbers as a program. So we tell them, hey, we don't want you in this program. It's not that I don't want to get you this rebate, but actually, you're going to mess up, our realization, so we don't want you. I mean, what do we do there?
Sure.
This furry dice is making the rounds here.
We can toss it, but it gets crazy.
Okay. So that's a very, very good question, David. Very good point. So we have the ability to screen out projects where the homeowner got an electric vehicle or got solar. So we have the ability to do that, and we will do that. If the customer did a remodel and they increased, let's say, square footage by more than 20%, that's a legitimate reason to toss them out of your calculation. So if you can let us know that happened, we can subtract them from the calculation. The only other reason I can think of is that they move. They left and a new homeowner has taken over in that house. And again, if you know that, just let us know and we can take them out of the equation. But we think after we've made those corrections that the realization rate should be pretty good. The one thing I do want to acknowledge, though, is these models, the software models that you use to predict savings on a house, they're physics-based models. You put all the inputs about the physics of the house, and they predict what the energy savings is going to be. They can't predict consumer behavior, right? And we know that. And that's why we're not striving for 100% realization rate. We're trying to get it up to 80%. And we're not saying we're going to cut you off at 80. We're cutting people off closer at more like 50. So we realize it can't be perfect. It's not a perfect tool. But we want to increase the realization rate because we're paying too much and we've been basing the payments on the predicted savings, and that has just been, it's gone crazy. It's actually gotten worse over the years. The new software tools we thought would predict better than Energy Pro does. It turns out it's about the same, if not a little bit worse. So we need to do something to correct that.
Isn't those modeling software using empirical data to begin with?
Yeah, it's based on empirical data, but
So why would
You know, I could spend a lot of time trying to figure that out, but I'd rather do the stuff we're doing here. We know from experience that if we meet high-performance HVAC installation standards, we're going to get better savings. So I'd rather have you guys focusing on the equipment than the software. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So is the 1200 incentive, is this based on HVAC with the AC units or furnace as well?
It can potentially be a furnace-only project, but we need to talk about what is different about the, talk to us first when you're, especially if you're planning on doing that on a regular basis.
Are you going to do peak? Oh, sorry. Are you going to do peak load incentives? Like, is that your future? Like to incentivize more on our peak reductions?
Another really good question. Thanks for that. I think we would consider that. Yes. You've tossed something out that I haven't thought about yet for this program. That said, in our pay-for-performance programs that are running, 2 out of the 4 aggregators are getting paid 3x for savings at peak. So they are going to be looking for contractors who do well in getting savings at peak. And that is something that we can calculate for you, is what your load reduction has been. And so you'll be able to see some of that data. And frankly, when those pay-for-performance implementers come around looking for contractors, they're going to pick the contractors who have good realization rates, high energy savings, good savings at peak. So you'll be able to use all this data to sell yourself to those implementers.
We do have a question from the webinar. It looks like, let's see, so why not use the time of day rates for the end user to lower that afternoon peak? It's not because they would have better HVAC that would lower the afternoon peak. No, not necessarily, but having better HVAC all the time helps get you to the point where you don't have to use it as much during the peak hours. And then working with the customer, you can potentially modify the schedule. Especially, if you're building shell and envelope improvements as well, you're turning your house into a conditioning sink, right? You're keeping that energy in and requiring less of it to be used at any given time, any time of day.
Well, and I would say this too, PG&E is raising rates for people for time of use. That's already started. It's being rolled out in tranches across our territory. Everybody's going to be on time of use rate, and I think sometime next year, or maybe it's this year. But they already are paying a lot more. And in fact, we send out letters regularly to the high surcharge users to say, hey, we know you're a high surcharge user, you're seeing higher charges on your bill, here's what you can do, go to the website, and if they go to the website, it says Advanced Home Upgrade Program is available for you, and so on and so forth. So we are driving those customers to the Advanced Home Upgrade Program right now. Other questions? Input? How are we doing on time?
We're ahead, so we can
Okay.
break now, or do we want to break and maybe come back and do more questions when everyone's had a chance to think a little bit?
Sure. You want to do that? Take a break and talk a little bit. Dan, I know you had your hand up. Is there anything more you want to toss out before we?
I was just going to say that our reliance on energy models is sort of unique in our attempt to use energy models to predict an individual house. Sort of when you leave California and talk to people nationally, it's understood that an energy model will tell you if you do this thing and you look at 100,000 homes, it'll have this kind of effect. But any given house, they predict badly. And so even though they were built on some kind of science, they don't really work the way we're using them. And so that's just kind of where we're at.
Big deal. Okay, with that, let's take a break for, 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, let's take about 10 minutes. The restrooms are advised at elevators outside. When we come back, we'll do another quick round of questions, and we'll start on our high-performance HVAC training.
Yep.
Is there a way?
Hold on.
All right, are you guys ready? Come on in, sit down, please. You know you're someplace where people care about you when they put out a cup of water with your initial on it, just so that you can do your talk. This has never, ever happened before. Okay, I'm going to carry this with me because I'm not very good at staying still. So my name's Dan Perunco. How many folks, and I'm sorry for the people online that I can't see you raise your hand, but how many people have been in a talk with me before, a class or a conference or something? So it's about half the people in this classroom. As I was listening this morning, I was thinking about this process of trying to describe high-performance HVAC systems and teaching all these classes and people being excited about it and then going back to their world. And I eventually came to, I feel kind of like that Greek character that rolls the boulder up the hill and then the boulder goes down the hill and you roll the boulder back up the hill. And so the question is, how many of you have adopted these practices into your HVAC companies already? Right? Because I mean, this is not actually new. This is something we've been talking about for years and years. So completely adopted, I got about 3 or 4 hands. Completely adopted, or just a couple of things, or cool. Thank you.
Can you repeat that?
So I got one Mark. I'm not going to say last name because I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. But a gentleman raised his hand and said that since 2010, he had adopted all of the practices on this list already. So if that's the case, and you manage to feed 10 jobs through this company, or through this process, you get 12 grand, if I did the math right? Like, so this is a cool thing for folks that have decided that these practices make sense. And if I say anything about a program, assume that I could be wrong because I don't do that part. All right. Anybody else adopted all of this or just something? High performance practices. You do them.
Yeah, I mean, after taking your class, I took on
Most of them. Okay, good. So I think, listening to people talk, there's always this, well, can I still get the rebate if I can't seal the duct leakage? No. I mean, these things, we should be working towards these things being normal. And of course, there will be situations where you can't hit all of them, and that happens to me as well. I had a job that I thought was really kind of a drag. We put a 3-ton system on a 3,000 square foot house. And to me, that's too big. But we couldn't fix the house enough to reduce the size. And so the equipment is larger than I would like it to be. That happens to all of us within some boundaries. But I don't expect to be rewarded for that. Right? Like, this should be our new normal. So if you want to hunt me down later, here's my contact information. It'll be available to you again. This is the matrix that we were talking about. I think that these are reasonable practices. Number 2 is the one that I think we have phenomenal resistance to in our sort of contracting culture. And I don't completely understand why. I mean, there's a lot of fear of houses not being able to recover, salesmen being paid in some way related to the cost or size of the equipment. I don't understand what the obstacle is, but it's really hard for us to meet our energy efficiency, savings, and comfort goals with oversized equipment, especially in this climate, right? And so it has to happen.
Yeah, but you can't just install a smaller system without doing other steps.
That depends on what you compare it to. If you're comparing it to a reasonably accurate load calc for that building, then sure, that's a logical statement. If you're comparing it to the industry's practices, what is normal in my second example, the way we do things now, is done so badly that it's not a good comparison. Right? I can do 800 square feet per ton on mediocre buildings. I can do 1,500 square feet per ton on good buildings. Right? And so right now we're just nowhere close. This is just about heating systems, because there's a group of contractors that don't do much air conditioning, and they have asked repeatedly, can we be in the program? We really don't install air conditioning. We need to be able to demonstrate that the competencies are there to do a system that has heat and air conditioning. So Torsten showed a slide earlier that said your initial submissions have to have both, but then we'll figure out a way to do this for heat-only systems. The rubbing point is the in number 5, this is 85% of performance for air conditioning or a heat pump. With gas equipment, it's that much harder to do the math for this because you're trying to track gas and electric. But I think we'll come up with something, and again, this is not decided, something like 80% of nominal capacity. But we're going to have to be able to, we can use the same procedure to measure output, but we haven't settled on what that number will be. But we're going to figure this out so that heat-only systems can be in the program. This is the data sheet. You should be groaning, right? Like, I do this kind of thing, and when Mike McFarland and Rick Chitwood developed this, they sent it off, and I'm like, okay, there's just a lot of little boxes to fill out. But conceptually, it's not, none of these are hard measurements. It's about becoming familiar with this form. And the good news is you guys have been in these programs, and there's all kinds of weird stuff to fill out. So being able to overcome a form should be something we can manage. So you're collecting, right? I mean, this part you've got lots of training on. We should be able to manage this process. And so you're collecting, data about the building, data about the size of the heating and cooling equipment, and then data about the airflow and the temperature split. And we're calculating delivered BTUs to the building. And so if you have an attic system and you have 20% losses in the attic, your system's not going to qualify. Right? We have to manage getting the energy from the equipment to the building at better than 85% for air conditioning in order for this to work. And it's 85% sensible. So if you're a big piece of equipment and you're pulling a lot of moisture out of the air, again, you're not going to qualify. Right? So sizing is important. Burying the ducts in insulation will make your life much easier if you can do it. And all of that data gets recorded in here. This is how we figure out if you comply. There's a chart, oops, wrong button, sorry. There's a chart right here that gives you an idea about sizing. And so I just realized that I'm pointing again and the people online can't see it. So right-hand side, about halfway down, system sizing and required performance reference table. So if you had a 2,000 to 2,399 square foot house, your AC system has to be 2.5 tons or smaller, and your heating has to be 36,000 BTU input or smaller, which is hard. How many systems, can anybody buy a 36,000 BTU input system? No, right? Like this is where it gets tricky. We'll have to sort out acceptable solutions. All of this is much, much easier with heat pumps. We still have the same rules around fuel switching and all of the program stuff, so we're going to have to figure out how to do this in a gas scenario unless you went, it would be easy if you went to hydronic forced air, which a lot of contractors don't want to do because it's unfamiliar. Furnaces are going to be tricky in smaller houses. There are some small furnaces out there, but not a ton. This is the second page of that same data sheet. As you're working through collecting airflows and temperatures, you fill out this side. Has anybody ever seen this before? I got one nod. So when you're measuring airflow, you use a flow hood typically, and we usually just read the number off the flow hood and say, that's great, that's our airflow. It turns out when you're defining how much energy a system is moving, you can't just read the airflow, you have to correct it for temperature. All of those calculations are done with air under standard conditions, which is a certain temperature and at a certain altitude. And so we have to correct for that before we can do the energy calculation, which means that your airflow has to be really good. If it's, say, like where I work, at the top of this chart, go up to like 4,000 feet and 80 degrees, I lose 9% of my airflow. So my measured airflow is 1,000, I have to drop it by 90, and then I feed it into my calculations, which means my energy output through the system is going to calc lower than if I hadn't done that calculation, right? But this is the proper way to do this sort of delivered BTU calculation, and it's in our procedure, so we're doing it. Fortunately, a lot of you don't work up that high, and so, oops, sorry, wrong button again. If you're at the lower elevations, you can get a tiny little bonus up to about 2,000 square feet. It's not, or 2,000 feet of elevation, it's not too bad. So it depends a little on where we're working. There's a document that describes, and I'm going to jump back a bunch of slides so that I can point at, oops, that was not, I didn't want to go that far. Okay, so on the right-hand side where it says verification methods, those methods all have to be done following a procedure and with proper equipment. And so that corresponds to this document. And it's a multi-page document. It says what the procedures are. It says which pieces of equipment we can use. I suspect that we're going to do an update to this soon because one of the pieces of equipment has changed. I know that, and possibly the program people didn't because I'm not a full-time staff person. So I'm telling you, we probably have to make a change. There's a newer flow capture device on the market that should qualify for this. There's a device called the Flow Blaster that the Energy Conservatory made, which is great, but they screwed up. The batteries are bad, and so they stopped making it. And so that was the sort of the best piece of equipment when this was written. So I think we'll broaden the acceptable pieces of equipment for this. But the big flow hood that the HERS raters all use, it won't qualify. It's not accurate enough. And so that kind of stuff will be in this document. So why do I get to be up here? Because we're still back in this place, right? The boulder keeps rolling back down the hill. The HVAC industry is not turning out a product that's getting us what we want. And you guys represent people who are trying and have had successes to varying degrees, right? And so that's good. But overall, we still have this problem. And then the rebate and incentive program, it didn't get us there, right? Like we modeled all this savings and we didn't realize it. And so something has to change. And that's kind of what the whole beginning of this conversation was about. And then, of course, you can get pretty much anything past code. Like I know it doesn't always feel like that's true, but code is not getting us a big change in delivered efficiency for homeowners. Right? So there might be that a particular install detail is required and it's a real pain in the neck. But the amount of waste in our forced air systems isn't significantly better by virtue of the code changes we've made so far. Right? We need to do better. Does that feel fair? Anybody feel picked on? Like you guys are kind of like ringers, right? If I had a bigger audience, I'm sure somebody would be annoyed at me at this point. Which is kind of the point. Because I get to teach these classes, I get to meet all kinds of people. And there was this guy in class, and he said, the sizing criteria you keep talking about, they don't seem right. I've never heard anything like that before. And I said, no, there are a bunch of us are doing it. It works. We can prove it. I'm 100% certain that this is true. Then I said, why don't you go back and look at the data? Because, the CEC's got all this data from permits and HERS ratings and all that stuff. And go see what's going on. Tell me if what's coming in to the office is any good. Because they sort of all believe that they're busy making code and making rules, and it's, pretty good. And so this guy actually did it, and he sent me this data set. It's not very big, but it's super fun and kind of depressing. So 70% of the systems in his data set were 50% or more oversized. The average sizing of the oversized systems was 177% of our target. That's If you pull then AC systems out by themselves, you're 163% oversized. Of the total sample of 23 systems, 16 of the 23 were at least 150% oversized, right? So, like, what are we happy about? Why are we proud of ourselves? Like, and maybe you're not doing this and you get to be proud of yourself, but as an industry, yay for us, right? Like, this sucks.
At least they got permits.
And these are permitted, right? And that's part of the argument I've been having with these folks at the CEC. Like, the permitting in and of itself is largely meaningless at this point. We're not making the changes we need to make by virtue of requiring permits. So, soapbox aside, what do we have to do? This is the same stuff we've been talking about for years now. You adopted it a long time ago. You adopted it a long time ago. You guys have adopted it, which is great. We just need to continue moving this direction. Forced air heating and cooling systems can be thought about by 6 basic principles. And you'll see that these kind of line up with the program requirements. They were thought of by the same guy, right? Years and years and years ago, I said to Rick Chitwood, how do I figure out how to talk about and evaluate HVAC systems? And he said, oh, there's this article I wrote. Here, read it. It's called Performance Factors for HVAC. And it listed 7 things and a design target and a way to test it. I'm like, oh, this is great. And it's just a super simple, extremely effective way to look at what we do. So, duct leakage, 3% of nominal flow, right? That's 50% improvement over code. In this program, you'll actually have to have an airflow, whereas in code, you can kind of not have the nominal airflow and still get credit somehow, right? So, is this a hard target, 3%?
No.
No, this is way too easy. Like, contractors that are doing nothing else right are already doing 3% or better. Contractors who just aren't paying attention at all are struggling with this, and it showed up in that data set that there were a bunch of things that didn't qualify, but this is easy. Use mastic, right? Done. Use a lot of mastic, even better, right? This is not hard.
I know a story about mastic.
Okay, I've been coached that I let people talk too much and I'll blow my time slot, so you have to do it fast.
In 2013, we did a house in Oakland, I think, built in 1996. Bueller heating air had done the system and in fact on the time. And I was up there doing the duct leaks and looking at the air conditioner or the furnace. He had a name over it, and it was one of the only ones that I had seen at the time that was using mastic. Everybody else had been using duct tape. And so we went down to the duct leakage test. We got 2.9%. So that was like 16 years after the fact. And he had still had 2.9%.
2%, nice.
And at the time, Tower 24 was 6% on new construction. So I was targeting 6% duct leakage. But when I got that 2.9, I knew with mastic that we could get to 3. So I started targeting 3. The contractors that we were working with at the time were getting 1 and 2% on average using mastic. Nice. So it definitely helps.
So for the folks online, I was slow with the microphone. The beginning of that story was that the gentleman was testing homes in a development, and they had been the systems had been built with mastic. And so they tested well at 3% or better, and then at a period of time later, they also tested well. So effective and durable is the upshot of that story. And as a sort of contracting culture piece, using percentages is really dumb. We all do it because that's what we've been trained to do. It's so much easier when you say, okay, I'm going to do this duct blaster test, and it's going to give me a number of CFM of leakage. I'm never going to let that number be higher than something. Right? And so my company uses 25. It goes right in our work scopes. Duct leakage will not be higher than 25 CFM. All systems should pass code at that number, right? And it gives me a hard target that is never flexible. If I do a 5-ton system, which I've never done, but theoretically I could, I would still do 25 CFM of leakage. If I do a 1-ton system, I don't know, can I still do 1 ton? Yeah, I could. I've got a half hour left. I should be okay. So a hard target is the way to do this internally. Okay, so that next piece about ducts run as short as possible and low in attics is just about thermal losses, right? Thermal losses are huge in our climate because we do about the dumbest thing you could possibly do. We put HVAC systems on roofs and in attics, right? And I'm not saying we're dumb. It's just kind of hard not to at this point because that's how all of these buildings were built. We have millions of these, right? So it's our job to improve them to the sort of ultimate level we can get away with because this is the worst way you could do this, right? Like you can't find more harsh conditions to put a duct system in than the attic of the building, right? So we have to be really careful about how we do it. So this is a mathematical calculation assuming 2,000 square foot house, assuming 40% surface area of the duct system, which is the average relationship between ducts and floor area. And if you do the calculation for attic temperatures and R6 ducts, we're looking at 0.89 tons of loss capacity, right? And in this climate, you would do R8 ducts by code now. There's still, I think, maybe some coastal climates where you can get away with R6. Never use R6. It's crazy, right? Like, find a way to get the customer to pay for R8 and then bury that. Because a third of the capacity of a 3-ton system can be lost just to hot ducts. Right? Why would you give that away? Or, if you thought about it like this, if you fix this piece, you can reduce the size of the equipment by 30%, right? Which makes it easier to comply with the program. And better for your homeowner. They get better air quality, and they get lower bills and increased comfort. Why'd I say better air quality? Ducts are sealed, but it's directly related to equipment size.
Runtime.
Runtime. So California has some of the worst air quality in the nation for particulate matter, right? Farming and traffic and fires and everything else. How do you get particulate out of the air? With a filter. You can run the system so that it filters the air all the time and then have a massive air conditioner kick on and off once in a while to offset the load you're creating by doing that. Or you can run a tiny little conditioning system with a big filter at high airflow and get free filtration. It's up to you. We should be selling air quality. And if you sell air quality right now, people will buy it. Has anybody gone outside this summer or last summer? Right? It's not a hard sell. Small equipment will do a better job for you. I didn't do that. I don't think. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so run low in the attic and short as possible. In this instance, sadly, that was short as possible. There's a layout that I couldn't change, and so this big sort of elbow in this duct was unavoidable. We frequently reposition stuff, like abandon one ceiling supply and use a different location to shorten ducts. And this is the same photo. Right? Run low, pull tight, bury it. Crawl space systems. You know there's a furnace in this photo. Did you know that some furnaces can be wrapped in insulation? If you think about it, if you're going to take the hottest thing in the system and put it outside the building enclosure where we'll have the greatest losses, wouldn't it make sense to insulate it? Right? And so what's the deciding factor whether or not you can wrap a furnace in insulation? Because some of you, well, nobody in this room is going to make this mistake. But in theory, you could just leave and wrap a furnace and be in trouble because I said it, right? How do you know? Has anybody ever seen the thing on the label that says clearance to combustibles? If it's 0-inch clearance to combustibles on all 4 sides, you could wrap it in something flammable. In theory, right? I'm not going to, but fiberglass and foil-faced paper, which should be fine. And so we frequently do this. You know, service access is interesting. Okay, there was just a really strange sound in here. Anyway, so service access is interesting. I have an uncle who's an HVAC tech, and I was showing from the East Coast, and I was showing him pictures of our work. And they were like, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that. And it was all about how, he's 70 now and he worked into his 60s. And somewhere along the line, he wasn't bending over for anybody. And so the access became where a 60-year-old guy with a sore back could go without a lot of trouble, which makes some sense, but it's not a great way for us to design houses, right? Like if we centralize the equipment and the tech has got to crawl to it and cut some insulation off and then replace that, but it lowers the people's bills, isn't that the choice we should be making? And then how frequently do we need to do service?
Well, you don't need to do service that much. You just gotta make the access panel.
Right. Someone said I don't need to do service that much, which is what I was expecting someone to say. You've got to go twice a year. You have to go twice a year for things that have high pressure and lots of duct leakage and are prone to failure. Things that are well installed and the motor spins at a low RPM and there's not a lot of pressure and the temperature rises right, they go a long time without breaking, right? Unless there's a manufacturer's flaw and then we all get screwed. We eat the labor, they send us parts, and nobody's happy. But that's a small subset of reality. Like we don't need to service stuff constantly to make this work. And so this system in the picture actually has an unsealed insulated flap that can just be lifted over to the top of the furnace. The door is taped closed though, so that part kind of sucks. You got to cut the tape to get the door off. We need a zipper.
I've done attic access.
Oh, someone said that there's actually a zipper solution that works on attic, a zip lock. Oh, zip wall, using a zip wall for attic hatch. And I had a question in the back.
Yeah, where was the filter located in that system?
In this system, the filter is located at the return grill, which is my preference for filtration because it's easy for homeowners to take on the service themselves. So let me add an addendum to my service tirade. If the homeowner is not going to change the filter or is not able to change the filter, then they need service. Right? That does need to be done. If you use 4-inch pleated filters, it might be once a year instead of every 3 months.
Don't you want those filters as close to the furnace as possible or the air handler as possible? Because if you have a long return duct with potential leaks.
No, I don't. So this is a super simple process in my head. I don't have leaks because I don't allow them to happen. And frequently buried. And then, like I have to go do a service call soon because somebody's dog peed in their duct, right? Occurrences like a rat or a cat or a dog change this model. That's a service call, but it's not normal, right? It's the normal practice is if it's not leaking, it continues to not leak, right? And so well built, well sealed, and you don't have the problem. And in that instance, I want the filter at the beginning so that the whole duct is protected.
And it's more accessible to the homeowner to change,
right?
Which makes it easier on the equipment.
Absolutely.
It's changed frequently.
Frequently, yeah.
Most all houses I go out to, the filter hasn't. People don't even know where the filter is, or
there is an issue. There is an issue. Someone said that people don't understand that their system even has a filter, and so we do have some education issues. I have yet to have. No, that's not true. I've had very few homeowners that spent a lot of money having us retrofit their house and then just kind of blew off taking care of it. Not none, but very few. On the average, if someone goes down this path and pays the money to have something well installed, they'll generally, and I sell them a case of filters, right, so that they have the option to do this, then they do it. Okay, so this is probably maybe the most difficult one. If we do this properly, temperatures in the house stay within 3 degrees of each other and the thermostat set point when the equipment is running. If they turn it off, all bets are off, right? But if we're conditioning the house, we should be in control of it. And this is part of the test. You're going to measure temperature in multiple rooms, occupied rooms, and at one location you're going to do a foot from the ceiling and a foot from the floor. And they have to show up as all within 3 degrees with the doors open, right? So not actually super hard to do, but it requires that we do duct design and grill design. And so this is kind of where manual J, S, D, and T showed up, right? Like D is about sizing ducts properly. T is about sizing grills properly. I don't actually use T, but I do an engineering procedure to size grills. And what it gets me is throw appropriate for the size of the space and the load on the space. And then mixing is accomplished, and then happens naturally. And this is one of the primary complaints, right? Hot rooms, cold rooms, high bills, and allergies. And so we make this go away by designing the duct system so it includes throw. And that picture is an infrared photo of the effect of a duct in heating. Right? You can see the heat being thrown across the ceiling and impacting the wall. You're not required to do this. Life is so much easier when you do radial design because you put a grill in every location closest to the air handler that needs one, right? So little tiny rooms, we skip them because they don't need to be conditioned. And then you put a damper in each of those ducts, and you can be in control of the airflow without it being a really horrible task, right? If you have to balance the airflow by climbing all the way across the building and all the way back to try to adjust dampers, it's difficult. If you skip the dampers, you're just guessing. So that's the same photo as before, and then the effect of a floor register. So this is an engineering chart. I don't know exactly how manual J does the manual T process, but this is the gist of it. What this is showing you is grill sizes on the left, velocities on the top, and then in the rows and columns is a case for each grill, right? So if you pick like an 8x8 grill and 500 feet per minute, it would tell you how many CFM you need to make that happen, and then it would also tell you how far into the room the air is projecting as the air slows down. And so the trick is to get your design airflow through a grill at 500 to 700 feet per minute and have that air hit 25 feet per minute before it hits a person and get 80% of the way across the room. And it sounds complicated, and it is a little, I suppose, but you can get used to this. I've been doing this for years, and I've had a couple of times when I had to go back and change airflow because I was blowing on someone, but mostly this works without a lot of trouble. And it's very effective in terms of mixing the home and controlling temperature. So just so we're clear, you can't use that flow hood. I just didn't have a better picture. I should probably. But we're going to measure supply air with a flow hood. And for our delivered capacity calculations, you are allowed to use the sum total of the supply measurements if you use an accurate flow hood, and that's described in the measurement document. This flow hood's not accurate enough for the total delivered capacity calculation. It works okay for balancing. I used it for years and then found a better tool and stopped. But the process is the same. In this picture, we're going around to each grill, measuring the airflow and adjusting it to match our targets.
Is he barefoot?
Gavin is barefoot in that picture. Someone asked if the gentleman on the left is barefoot, and he frequently is. I may or may not have photos of him barefoot on a roof. It's good that we're a little company and OSHA doesn't visit us frequently. Okay, cooling coil airflow. So 450 CFM per ton is our target for this program. Why? Does anybody not know why yet? Does anybody know why? Why do we do high airflow? The boulder just rolled all the way down the hill. Yeah, so we live in what is effectively a desert, right? Like, when's the last time it was 80 degrees and 80% humidity here? For more than about, 90 seconds. Right? Like, there are weird humidity events, especially on the coast. But generally speaking, if it's hot out here, it's like 15% humidity, maybe 20. If it's cold out, it gets more humid, and it even rains. Turns out that the actual weight of water per pound of dry air in California is roughly the same in the summertime and in the wintertime. If you get it cold enough, the air gets dense enough, the water comes out of the air. If you warm it up, the container of air gets really large because it gets to be low density and it feels really dry, right? And so how much dehumidification does it sound like we need to do with an air conditioner? Literally none, right? Like, we should not manage moisture with air conditioners. They use too much energy for that. You can do a continually operating bath fan with an ECM motor for 8 watts and manage moisture in a house, right, in this climate. If we were in Louisiana, we would be having a different conversation, but we're not. And the way to do that in this climate is to raise the airflow compared to the amount of cooling capacity, because it makes the cooling coil warmer. And when the coil is warmer, you get less condensation on it. So we're literally trying to just deliver more heat to our air conditioning process so that we get less dehumidification. And 450 CFM per ton is on the low side of good for our climate. I routinely target 500 to 600 CFM per ton, and I have been over 600 CFM per ton, and I have occasionally been under 500 CFM per ton. So this is like a nice, safe entry point. Compared to what our industry builds, this is, like crazy and hard to do, because we're still hanging out at like 280, 300 CFM per ton as an industry in California. I don't know why, but, well, I have some ideas. But we need for this program to get to 450 CFM per ton and 0.25 watts per CFM, which is, my brain has trouble with the math that way, 250 watts per 1,000 CFM, right? So pretty low fan energy consumption. And we get there by doing things like sizing our ducts properly and stretching them. There's this really great study done by Texas A&M. When you install a duct like that, it has really low airflow performance. And when you install a duct like this, it has almost identical performance to a piece of smooth steel duct at the same size, right? All we have to do is pull them tight, and they work really well. Oh, yeah, and so remember before when I said I didn't know why we have low airflow? Turns out that one of the things that we found in a research study 3 or 4 years ago was that of the 80 homes, the new homes they went out and sampled, they pretty much all had undersized returns, every single one of them. And then they went out and just upsized the returns, corrected the airflow, and corrected the charge, and they got 10 to 15%, probably more like 10%, more delivered capacity at each of those sort of case houses than they had gotten as it was built by code, just by correcting the return, which raised the airflow, and then correcting the charge to match. 10% boost. We have a program here that's struggling to justify itself, and we're still building stuff where we get a gimme by just fixing the return, right? Like, we should stop. Ducts work better when they have metal elbows anywhere they turn, turns out, right? Flexible things kind of kink when you bend them. So what you can't see in this photo is that there's a metal plenum with a metal takeoff with a metal elbow, and then duct pulled tight against it. And there's a damper in that assembly someplace, right? The orange flags are dampers. And then of course we insulate it for conduction. But this dramatically raises your airflow, right? And how many systems are still going in with just the duct sort of folded over at the boot, right? Constantly. Anytime we turn the duct, you need to use a metal elbow. And it says that in this program someplace. Fortunately, I already sort of beat on this a little bit, right? Sizing for the program is at these metrics. You need to do a load calc, manual J specifically required. And if manual J says that you can't meet these targets for the house, then don't submit the house or change the building enclosure, right? Like there's no, well, it doesn't work and I want my money, right? Like you've got to make it work. And the way you make it work is optimize the HVAC system. And then if you want the house to be a candidate, the homeowner has to agree to some building enclosure improvements. And if they won't, that's okay. But they don't, this house doesn't go. And those are conservative. Those aren't hard. And we can do this on just sort of typical buildings. They don't have to be incredible buildings to pull this off. This is a fan watt draw. So that's just one leg of a 220 system. So I'm at 108 watts. Oops. And I'm at 884 CFM. And so I almost hit 8 CFM per watt. When you calculate it the way the program is using it and code does it, we're at 0.12 watts per CFM. And it's actually not very hard to do this. You have to keep your static pressure low. and then it's big. This is where it gets a little weird, right? I keep saying smaller, smaller, smaller. Turns out big fans turning slowly are way more efficient than small fans turning quickly. So ideally, if you're not using a furnace, you would do something like use a 3-ton air handler and a 1.5 ton condensing unit, or a 2-ton condensing unit. The fan is designed to move a lot more air than the condensing unit requires, which means you can set it on a lower tap setting. The RPM of the fan actually slows down, and the efficiency of the fan blades is increased. You get more air moved per unit of energy with a big fan turning slowly. And the AHRI matching process is so strict that you can't go crazy. You can't do like a massive air handler and a tiny little air conditioner. We can usually do a 0.5 ton or a 1 ton mismatch, and we should in our climate. So this is a 2-ton air handler, or a 2.5 ton air handler, I think, and a 2-ton outside unit. So it's only maybe a 0.5 ton mismatch. There wasn't a specific charge requirement in the program rules, right? If you think about that spreadsheet, because you have, perfect picture memory and you can visualize exactly what it says. Nowhere in there does it say charge must be some number, but you're not going to get your output calculation right unless we get superheat and subcool correct. Code's been funny about these. What is the range of acceptable superheats for equipment according to the code verification? It's like 4 to 23 or 3 to 26 or something like that. So what does superheat mean? Does anybody know? Because this is actually more important than the number. Temperature after boiling. And so so you want a superheat to be between 5 and 10, right? So not a lot of temperature rise after boiling. So if I have a lot of temperature rise after boiling, what happened? Just don't think too much. It's a really simple answer. Something added heat after boiling, right? And the least effective way for us to move heat is by changing the temperature of something without changing its state. Like boiling refrigerant absorbs a ton of heat. Changing the temperature of boiled refrigerant or boiled water doesn't really take much heat at all. And so if you have a system that comes back with high superheat and it passes code and everybody goes home happy, you can be leaving 10% delivered capacity on the table. Because what that actually means is you have this coil with boiling refrigerant in it, and you have literally too much surface area that's not under phase change. And so you're giving away like super important real estate for air conditioning. If you get superheat down where it ought to be, you're maximizing the efficiency of that process, right? And your compressor watts barely change. Like there's not a big penalty for running more fluid through. You'll see a small change in watts and a big change in BTUs, right? And there's nothing in code that makes us do it. So what do? We don't do it, right? So superheat of 5 to 10, unless the manufacturer says clearly you have to do something else, and I've never seen that. So I think I probably just said everything that's on this slide. Obviously, we're doing higher efficiency equipment, so it's going to have a TXV. Subcool is required by code. We want that to be as low as the manufacturer will allow. Subcool is basically a measure of back pressure against your compressor. So the higher it gets, the more pressure you have against the compressor and your watt draw goes up. So subcool on the low side of your targets, superheat on the low side of the manufacturer's target, and you get more capacity. And we should commission furnaces too. Does anybody do this? Actually measure O2, CO2, temperature, gas pressure, all of that stuff. National Comfort Institute is not a great organization for getting coaching about like how to do an energy efficient building, but they are a great organization when it comes to like understanding the combustion process. They have a really good class about that. I think is possibly the best class available for figuring out how to commission a furnace. So I would look at it. So this is that last thing I said earlier in the review of code buildings. We were at something like 55% of delivery. If it's supposed to be 4 tons of capacity. At design conditions, we're getting like 2.25 tons or something, right? We're getting a little more than half of the capacity to the house. And the reasons are high duct conduction, high duct leakage, and low airflow, right? Like it's embedded in what we're trying to change, why this is happening. And so the people who are really good at this at design conditions have had systems over 90% delivered capacity. And we're not asking for that. 85% is what we're asking for. And I think with furnaces, it might have to be 85% of whatever the output is, because if you commission the furnace, there's not much you can do about the 4% that gets lost in the combustion process. So that for furnaces, we're going to have to figure something out. But for heat pumps and air conditioners, 85% delivered capacity is the target. And if your equipment is big, is this harder or easier? You should be noticing a theme, right? It's harder. Why is it harder? Think about the temperature of the air in the duct. If you're using a large heater or a small heater, is the temperature of the air in the duct likely to be what? Right? Like small heaters should be not quite as hot as a big heater. If you do the math for figuring out temperature loss or temperature sort of travel through a material, the variables are the insulation value or the heat transfer value, so U value or R value, the size of the surface, and the temperature across the surface. And so if you run a smaller heater for a longer period of time, you lose less energy through the duct system than a bigger heater. There is some variable that changes it based on run times, but it turns out that heaters in the size range we're talking about still cycle at design days. They don't run flat out. So it's not like this one runs 50% and the other one runs 100% of the time, which is what we used to say. Turns out that properly sized heaters and air conditioners cycle on design days. So nothing is running full time, unless you really downsize, in which case you can make that happen. I have a system at my house that's 50% of design, and at design conditions it doesn't shut off, right? But it's 50% of the load calc. And I'm not suggesting that you do that unless you want to. Turns out my house is super comfortable. This is what your sort of first time might look like if you're not used to trying to work against these metrics. This company was selected because they were turning in a lot of jobs. The owners wanted to do this, at least they said they wanted to do this, and we went out and looked at their jobs. And the red marks are all the things that, it was just like grading a school paper, right? You got to change this, you got to change that. And so I think it can be a little daunting, but if you decide to wrap your head around this, I think you can make the change pretty quickly. None of these concepts are new concepts, right? Like the information about how to meet these criteria all exists already. I think that it requires some kind of change all the way through a company. And the reason that I say that is when I do these classes, I get, well, we can't do load calcs, it'll cost too much money. Okay, code says you have to do a load calc, by the way, right? So not doing one is actually breaking the code rules. I want to say breaking the law, but people get upset about that. So, right, the rules say you have to do a load calc. They actually don't say you have to follow it. They clearly say you don't, but they do say you have to do it. Okay, so we're just saying do a useful load calc that's already required by the rules. And so, the other one is, well, I'm never going to get my salesman to sell equipment this small. And then I always go back to, don't they work for you? And I get that the employee-employer relationship is complicated, but at some point, you could figure out these guys need to get paid, or girls, and they should be selling something that you want them to sell. Right? Like there's got to be a way to get from here to there. And I'm not saying it's simple, easy, and that there's no stress involved. But just we can't just kind of hang up our hats. And then it changes design, and it changes install, and it changes our commissioning practices. We're talking about really changing the culture of a company. Like I've only ever done 2 rebate jobs in the history of my company. And I have no idea what my realization rate is. It might suck. I don't know. I got one customer, $7,000. I got another one, $5,000. They were happy. I did the job that I thought was a good job. But I meet all these criterias on all of my job, which means that there are some jobs that I don't take and I'm a small contractor, so I have the luxury of not taking some jobs. And I realize that for some people, you're going to take jobs that you can't access all of these metrics for. But it becomes a question of like, when is it okay to sell a job that has really bad airflow? Because the customer doesn't, like at some point, I'm willing to say no way sooner than a lot of companies will say no. And that's in part because of my company, right? Like I'm not trying to be judgy about that. But there should be some point where you say no. And so some of these metrics should just be normal, right? And that's kind of what some of you said in the beginning. We've adopted some of these practices and other ones we're working on. So we have some money for training. You've got about, like, if one of us came out to your site, you have the equivalent of about 5 days of time. And that's not a lot in a way, right? Like, so this really got to be a company decides they want to do these things and they're looking for support, whether it's coming to the PG&E classes. Like I do this whole talk for a whole day, right? And we can talk about all of this stuff and you can ask all the questions you want, right? And, pursuing whatever other opportunities there are to sort of fill in the blanks for your company. And then on top of that, between what the company has to kick in and what PG&E will match, we can be on site for 5 days. And of course we can come longer, it's just at 5 days PG&E stops matching, right? And then there could be a little variation. Like if you want me to go to Arizona, it's probably not 5 days because I'm working against a solid dollar amount. But we'll talk about what we can do and how the best way is to do it for each company and try to get a plan together that works. Ultimately, you guys have got to drive the process though. Right? Like you've got to actually, that was the problem with the company with the red marks. It turned out that they were not driving the company to be different at all, right? They wanted to, so long as they didn't have to do anything different. You guys have to be making a committed effort to hit these marks and then we can help. I think that's where we're at.
What about if there's a couple companies that want to get together and do this?
So the question was, what if there were multiple companies who want to try to do this together? I suppose that is reasonable. The more people in the room, the more difficult it will be. So, yeah, I wouldn't say no. I would try that. I get paid whether or not you succeed, and I will try like hell to make you succeed, but ultimately that's not my choice, right? And so if people don't succeed because they weren't committed or because they made the process too hard, and they fail, they still have to pay me, right? Like, so figure out what the balance is. Like a couple of companies that were really committed and worked well together, sure. A couple of companies that are just watching dollars, probably not. But I'm into it, I'll try. Oh, cool. Do package units come into play? 70% of homes that are doing change outs in our area are package units which do not meet the AFU standards you're asking for. So no. This is a change. So no, it won't qualify if it can't. If its AFU is lower than the delivered capacity we need, it's by virtue of just that alone, it doesn't comply with the intention of the program, and so we're not going to incentivize it. However, package unit systems are awesome. So you tear the package unit, assuming there's an attic or a crawl space or something. You tear the thing off the building, it leaves a big hole. You use that for access. You never have to destroy the interior of the home or do dust protection or any of that stuff. You go in and out through that hole. You build a nice system inside the attic or crawl space, then put a door on the hatch when you're done, and you could comply. But package units will never comply. They're low efficiency by virtue of having to waste a lot of heat so that their condensate doesn't freeze. So they can't do it. So that's a Build It Green question, Mike. And so the question is, in Climate Zone 1, AC is very rare. How do we get approved? I suppose it would be possible to do an approval that was conditional, and so you approve for heat systems, and then you'd have to go through a verification process if you submitted an air conditioning system later. There's got to be a way to make it work. Everybody's intention is to be able to get contractors to do this work, and I think people are committed to trying to figure out a path. So I think the answer is yes, and we don't know exactly what it'll look like yet. So that was your question, Mike. Do I have any other questions?
If you're a general contractor and a subcontractor certified in this, does the general contractor automatically qualify to do this now?
So that's, what's that? Oh, the question was, thank you, I've been reminded to repeat the question. Basically, who gets the incentive if a general contractor is running a job, the subcontractor is qualified for this program, and the subcontractor delivers the product on behalf of the general contractor? I have no idea, I'm not a program person.
That kind of scenario would be more of a, you as the general contractor, the participating contractor, you'd be submitting the work, you'd be taking part in the training so you understand what it is the subcontractor is actually installing. And as long as this is who you're using on those projects, it's potentially something you could do because they're, under the participation agreement, they're following the same program rules as you are. Now, we'd encourage them obviously to actually become participating contractors in their own right, but that's part of what you agree to when you sign up for the program.
So the GC and the subcontractor have to both be certified?
Yeah, basically you'd be training together. So if you're doing the sales process and stuff like that, your salespeople need to know. So if that's you, then you're involved in the training. You may not have to be involved in as much of it, but it would benefit you to see all of it end to end so that you know every step of the way, you understand the pain they go through to deliver on the installation requirements and the measurement.
More questions?
Anybody else have more questions? It can be for anybody who was speaking about program or technical stuff or whatever.
With the ducts, so if you can't get to one of the ducts because it's in the soffit, whatever.
It's the age-old question of it's beyond my control. It's in a wall. How do we? Can it comply? And I think for this program, you either get it there or it doesn't comply. And it might mean that it's actually ducted. It's not just a wall cavity, and you have to get the customer to pursue AeroSeal or something like that. Ultimately, leaky ducts don't serve the customer, the grids. Nobody wins in this scenario other than the fact that somebody bought a house and it has a bad thing in it, and nobody wants to say that we have to pay to fix it because that part sucks. I get that, but I don't. At some point, we have to just say, we can't reward that because it's not a good call. And ultimately, the program folks can have a different answer because that is above my pay grade. But as I read this, that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask, David, how often is that the case? I mean, you work in San Francisco, so I understand there's a lot of old homes with, small nooks and crannies and whatnot.
Yeah,
So.
I think we come across that quite a bit. I think, it's a single-family rancher. Obviously, that's very easy to get to the the 3%. But if it's not, and it's a two-story house with risers, we do, it can vary a lot, and there could be. And I've never had a client say, you know what, let's open up, I really want the leakage, I want to get to that duct, let's open up let's knock down that molding and get to that soffit, so you can access. They're like,
You suggest that to them.
Right, it becomes it's part of the sales process. San Francisco folks, I tend to work on their weekend houses up in Tahoe.
We don't do molding. We don't, to have my guys even touch that would be, you're not.
But I get that this is a difficult answer, but listen, follow me all the way through the logic. The customer doesn't want it to happen. You're nervous about doing it because of complexities with fixing plaster in the building, and your crew doesn't have that skill set. And those are all perfectly logical things to be thinking about. But the goal here is to improve the energy consumption of buildings, and none of what we just said has anything to do with that, right? All the reasons we don't want to do it have nothing to do with why we're incentivizing people. And so it's not an illogical thing to say you can't get paid for that. It's actually perfectly logical to say, well, we're going to incentivize that house. And then, how many of you really work on other solutions? We try really hard to abandon things that shouldn't be there and move ducts to new locations. And, and there'll be some cases where you can say, okay, look, none of this is any good. So we're going to do two systems. They're going to be tiny. There's one in the attic and one in the crawl space, and we're not reusing any of the old ducts. Right? And how many of those do we miss? Because what you're saying is true. There will be houses that you just can't get in this program for the budget that you have. But how many times did we just say, well, that we want an allowance, and we didn't work through the whole process? And I don't know the answer for you, but we try really hard.
On the 3% can we, is it specific, is total leakage, can we use leaks to the outside also?
This is total leakage. So the question was, can we use leakage to the outside? Can we use just total leakage? It just makes it not gameable, right? Like this thing leaks this much, and leakage to the inside is not like beneficial. It's just that we've used it to make things easier for people historically, right? And there's not much argument for it. And while we're on this whole leakage thing, sell air quality. Leaky ducts in our environment are just delivering pollutants to people, right? Learn how to read some of the research about air quality, learn how to talk about that. There's a webinar question, then question in the back, and then question in the front. General consensus in the industry is to go to all-electric heat pumps. How are ductless mini-splits looked upon? Can a gas furnace be removed and heat pump installed? I think we still have the fuel switching restrictions that we have always had. We can talk about those in another forum, and I will probably share your opinions. But that's the marketplace we work in, right? Like you and I and other folks don't get to make that change. And I know that people have worked on it, and there's been discussions that there might be change. Keep your fingers crossed. Question in the back.
I just had a quick comment about, a lot of homes I go into have the furnace, in a closet inside the living space. And should it be a general practice to either move it, out of the living space into the attic or underneath? Because you have, giant combustion air vents above and below, and then we're in there trying to air seal, and you have a return grid 10 feet away, and everything else is air sealed, yet you have this furnace closet that was, had an 80%er in there, they went to a 90 plus. Should it be a standard practice that they always plumb that combustion air vent down either to the sub area or to the attic, and then close off those combustion air vents so that you can get a better, obviously seal the house better, keep the conditioned air in, right? House is a system.
The beginning of that question that you may not have heard because I didn't get there fast enough was the example of a conditioning system inside the building enclosure in a closet with combustion vents through the building enclosure. And, think about it like this. You're in a program where you can be rewarded for lowering the blower door number, and you can be rewarded for increasing the heating efficiency. And the only reason you didn't get both was the HVAC contractor only ran one pipe and didn't run a second pipe to outside. We're talking about like 25 to 100 feet of 2-inch PVC pipe, and your blower door number would have gone down by another couple hundred CFM, and the rebate would have gone up. The incentives are there because the building is better when it's more airtight, right? And the logic, like it blows my mind that we've been missing that one, right? Like it's crazy to put in a sealed combustion appliance and then leave a hole in the building enclosure. And so we should just not do that. And then in this particular program, somewhere it says sealed combustion appliances have to be both pipes to outside. So to comply with this metric, you have to do it. Oh, that was up front, sorry.
Or maybe Bill Green in general, are there any marketing pieces available for us to give to potential clients to kind of show them why these things are important? I mean, I can talk till I'm blue in the face sometimes and talk about bad indoor air quality, and they kind of look at me like really suspect, like I'm some sort of a snake oil dude.
I don't get to answer that one.
A few years ago they had something, but it's kind of disappeared. It was like on us to do something, and I'm sure there's some sort of a professional marketing piece that we could use as part of our project.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some additional resources that we can work on for that. Part of what we're doing here is proposing some solutions, and exactly what that looks like is, a little bit what's at issue, and once we finalize that, then that'll kind of determine what that looks like. I mean, we're going to produce some guidance on being able to get customers to share their data. This is another thing we'd like to be able to do is provide you guys with some sort of leave behind or like concise brochure that kind of runs through this, something as visual as well as not too much verbiage about it, because people don't tend to process that effectively. So yeah.
Add on to that. We have been discussing at a program level that right now the customer, your general customer out in the marketplace right now has no idea that this even exists. They don't know what it is. And if we are going to take this standard and run with it, we have to take on the burden of creating that market, creating that education. So that's something we're discussing with PG&E. It's a big topic internally as to how are we going to bring high performance HVAC to market so that your customers are calling you and asking for it. Taking that burden of you off of trying to sell it, having them actually meeting you halfway and going, oh, yes, please, over here, let's have some of that.
We'll still probably have to sell it.
Yes. Okay, one last question, then we've got to move on.
Are you going to be putting a marketing plan together based solely on high performance initiative?
Yes. Yep. We're already working.
So we'll be able to be in front of our customers, slapping it down and saying this is what
yes.
you need to do. Okay.
Yep. All right. So, who has the clicker?
Yeah. Okay.
Ready?
That was great, Dan. Thanks. Sure. Thanks a ton. So I think you can all see. Yeah. Big hand for Dan. Most of you know Dan, but we're incredibly lucky to have him as a resource, and he also works with some other very highly qualified professionals too. And I do highly recommend you avail yourselves of their expertise. It does help a lot to have them out in the field with your crews. Obviously, I think that's the best way for them to learn. So we encourage you to do that, and we've provided some incentive for you to do that too. So I'm just going to kind of touch on a couple of things. I know it's late in the day. I appreciate everybody sticking around. We've had some great discussion. I think you've learned a lot today. I know I learned some. And I just want to kind of round it out by bringing things to a conclusion and providing a little bit more context for you all. So, what we are proposing in terms of helping you get that regular feedback on how you're doing is we did commit to quarterly providing you access to what your realization rate is and what your actual energy savings are, and we're going to do that. I'm also going to kind of provide you a ranking of where you sit in relationship to everyone else on your realization rate, on your electric savings, on your gas savings, so you'll know kind of where you sit with everybody else. And I'll provide sort of ranges in there for what those electric savings are, so you know where you are in a range. Turns out, unless you have at least 100 homes that you've done with us, I can't share the actual usage data. And if I give you a summary of that, the CPUC says that's too close to giving you access to their actual data without their permission. So just know that there's some rules that I'm working under, but I will give you as much as I can give you. And if you have over 100 homes in the program, I can give you access to your exact summary usage data. So what we want to do next year is consider this. You guys can tell me whether this is something that you welcome or not. But by June 1st, 2019, publishing your average energy savings per home and your quintile ranking. So maybe you're in the top 20% of high performers based on realization rate and or absolute energy savings amount. We are considering publishing that. So that's something you can use, in your marketing. If you're in those upper quintiles, I would think you'd want to. Also, allowing you to, as I say, to use that in your marketing material. And then by January 1st, 2020, we really have a decision to make at PG&E, and that is whether we continue this program, if it's meeting cost-effectiveness requirements and or it's meeting other PG&E goals, like I said, high energy savings during peak. Those are reasons we would want to keep the program going. If the program still has really low cost-effectiveness, we're not getting really good savings, we're going to have to consider whether we try to move you into the pay-for-performance programs, because those programs They bid in a price that I pay them per MMBTU or per kWh in therms, and that's a set price. So I know going into that what my cost effectiveness is going to be. I mean, everything's kind of set and established. If they don't get the savings, I don't pay them. The ratepayer doesn't lose anything in our program designed like that. But those programs are challenged to see if they can scale and get a lot of customers and get a lot of savings. So they're just coming online now, and I don't know yet whether they're capable of doing that. So that's going to be playing out over the next year and a half. Is can they come to scale? Can they get me big savings? And can those savings, frankly, replace savings that I'm currently getting through this program? I wouldn't mind a year and a half from now having both programs running right alongside each other. That's fine if they're both cost effective. But that's a decision that we're going to have to make at PG&E in about a year and a half. So to not leave that hanging, I did want to just touch on what pay for performance is in a couple of slides. As I mentioned, we put out an RFP, request for proposals. We've done that twice actually in the last 2 years. And what happens is an aggregator, this is also called an implementer, steps forward and says, yeah, we'd like to run this program for you. And I asked for a bid price from all of us, very competitive. And I considered a lot of factors in who we picked, who had a lot of experience out there with residential programs, who had a really good idea for how they were going to get customers and get savings, and also what the price was. Those were the main factors we considered. And then we picked 4. They will work with our customers, and we will measure and meter their savings, and we will pay them for the savings. Again, based on an agreed upon price. The one thing that was, I think, unique to this program that we hadn't done in other programs is we gave them complete flexibility to decide what products and services they wanted to offer customers. We didn't dictate anything about what the program design had to be. And so we got some very interesting proposals, and I'll go through those in just a minute. But those can be, traditional retrofit stuff, putting in new measures, things that we're used to seeing. It can be operational things, so just things that are on a schedule or a timer that can be controlled and optimized. And then behavioral stuff, incentives. One of the aggregators has a points and rewards program, and they reward customers if they get energy savings, and they can use those rewards for more efficient products, or they may consider other things. But at any rate, all of those are in play. You guys, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide, but the way we calculate their savings is a very simple weather normalized pre-post. So it's the same way we calculated the savings in the advanced home upgrade program that you guys were just looking at. We don't apply any control group and figure out what net savings. It's all based on gross savings, because we heard back from the implementers, if you subject us to some unknown control group later, we're not going to play. Like we need certainty up front about how we're going to get paid. And so we're going to pay based on the simple weather normalized pre-post. And then, just to kind of contextualize this a little bit more, this is where we are today, these existing conditions. This is where a future state that we're driving toward here. And I want to just spend just a second on this, a couple seconds. And that is, we have some driving legislation in California. We have the SB 350 goals. And the governor just signed even higher goals for reducing energy use in buildings. AB 802 was a legislation that allowed us to pay based on metered savings. And then we also have what are called DER, Distributed Energy Resource RFOs, Requests for Offers. And we just had one here in Oakland for Dynergy. It's the power plant here that PG&E is closing. And we need to replace that load. And we decided we'd try to replace it with energy efficiency. So we put out a request for offers. We said, hey, who's out there that can deliver energy efficiency to replace the load from this plant we're taking offline? And so we got some proposals. We're still reviewing those. But PG&E is likely to do more of this in the future. In fact, we're closing Diablo nuclear power plant. How many people knew that? A few. So that's 22% of our load, our electric load is provided by a nuclear power plant. We're going to need to replace that load. And so we're going to be looking for doing that through energy efficiency and through some other renewable resources. But you're going to see RFPs coming out with large dollar figures assigned to them as a distributed for energy efficiency as a distributed energy resource. But where we are today, again, is, sorry, just kind of back to the existing situation. You guys have no insight as to what your savings are. What we want to do is provide you these dashboards so that you have insight on the savings and ultimately arrive at a future state where you have a lot of confidence based on your track record when, where, and how much savings you can reliably deliver at a competitive cost. Currently, our incentives are not aligned with metered energy savings. It's all with the predicted savings, right, from the software. It turns out that's over-predicting. We need to align those incentives and reward them for savings at the meter. And that way, EE will compete successfully in these distributed energy resource RFOs due to the track record. Currently, today, this is the existing condition again, energy efficiency is really not seen as a reliable distributed energy resource, and that's the history of these deemed or predicted savings. We've always paid incentives based on predicted savings. And guess what? When you do a billing analysis or a metered analysis, you find that we've been overpaying and the predictions were too high. So we need to get closer to the meter. We will gain recognition for being able to deliver on metered savings. I showed you guys those load shapes where your work had been reducing energy use during peak hours. That's something we can take to the bank. That's something that you can use, or these implementers or aggregators could use when they bid into these RFOs. They can say, look, we have a track record of delivering. We're working with contractors who, I'm showing you their modeled results. That will be very valuable out in the marketplace. So we will arrive eventually at this future state where we are delivering savings as a reliable distributed energy resource. So is that helpful as an overall context? Question?
Can you tell us who would name an aggregator for what type of organization?
I will, right now. So your first one is right here in the room, Build It Green. Build It Green submitted a proposal under our first RFP, and they were awarded a contract. What they plan to do in their program is to these three measures on every single home, and they plan to do it out in climate zones 11, 12, and 13. They will do for about 50% of the homes, air sealing, more efficient furnace, and I think water heater, maybe. But at any rate, they partnered with EGIA, and they have a financing organization here that's provided financing for that. They're just getting started this month out in the field. They have a few contractors they've already selected to work with, and they're just kind of getting things worked out with that initial set of contractors. And then my guess is that they'll probably start to look for more as they expand. This is another one of our implementers. They're called Home Energy Analytics. They're very new to the PG&E world, although they've been doing this for local governments for the past 5 years. They're not focusing on the home. They're focusing on the stuff in the home. So they want to reduce base load, all of the plug load and appliances in the house other than HVAC and in the shell. And so they provide a home energy report to the customer. They disaggregate their load and their base load into what you see here is these different categories. And then they make recommendations for the customer. And it turns out they also have an energy coach, someone you can call on the phone, and they'll come out to your house. That coach will come out. And they tend to be working right now with people who have larger homes. There are a lot of wealthy people out there who, quite frankly, have no idea what's going on in their home, and energy-wise, and they're uncovering some really, we would think of as kind of obvious areas, but as I say, people aren't familiar with them, and so they're finding pool pumps that are running 24/7. They're finding baseboard heaters in a downstairs bathroom that the guest used 2 years ago and left on, and they didn't know it was on. They're finding patio doors open on a downstairs room that is all summer long with the AC going and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of energy out there to harvest, and they're out there to try to harvest that. Not to say that they'll only be working with larger homes. They also plan to work with more moderate income folks. They've been working mostly on the peninsula, but they're moving out now to the Fresno area. And they do a really good job of marketing with local governments. And then I just signed a contract 2 weeks ago with Franklin Energy. They're new to California, but they're probably the #2 energy efficiency provider in the country. Very big. They're out of Wisconsin. They got a lot of programs that they run across the country. And they're doing a really interesting kind of customer journey. So the journey starts with getting customer to give them access to their data through Share My Data, providing a home energy assessment, providing them low-cost self-install and a smart thermostat. So there's only a $40 copay for the smart thermostat. And then if they need installation, they can get that. They also provide this no-cost home energy products kit. There's a few energy efficiency products in there, some light bulbs, faucet aerators, and stuff like that they provide for free. So this gets the customer started. And then they have the points and rewards program for verified installations. People can upload photos and more points as you save energy. And then they'll give you credit toward the purchase of more energy efficient products, or they may consider other things like gift cards to Starbucks and stuff like that. So that's the big part of theirs is the goals and rewards. And then finally, when the customer's ready, they'll provide rebates on installed HVAC related measures and pool pumps. And this is the work that you guys do. They're going to try to line up manufacturers, and that's the same that Build a Green has done in their program. The manufacturer is providing a rebate for high efficiency equipment. And in fact, Build a Green is implementing this portion of the program for Franklin Energy. So not being local, Franklin was smart to come in and partner with somebody who is local and knows who the contractors are, who can perform well, and the contractors who've been working the program and understand home performance. So for this program, Franklin told me 2 days ago they're planning to launch January 1st. They will be looking for contractors to participate in this program with them. I have a fourth that I can't tell you who it is yet because we're just days away from signing a contract with them, but I can tell you that what they plan to do is go out to existing systems, tune up those systems, install smart thermostats, and optimize the system. So they're not replacing or exchanging any equipment. It's all optimization of existing equipment. That's their program design. And just so you know where these programs are working, so I mentioned that Build a Green is working climate zones 11 through 13, home energy analytics on the peninsula and out Fresno. They're probably going to expand from there. Franklin Energy plans to start in Contra Costa County and San Joaquin. And then they're free to expand from there, but that's where they want to start. And then finally, the fourth contractor is going to be in climate zones 12 and 13, doing HVAC optimization. So this is the future. I tried to give you the full context of what's going on. We have these larger RFOs that are going out, and we have some very now targeted programs within pay for performance. As I say, we're building toward this future where energy efficiency is right up there with solar and other things that PG&E and the other utilities can bank on when they're looking for reducing load. And in my mind, as I said, because of that high summer peak, you guys are critical to that. It can't be done without your participation. So with that, I just want to conclude and say thank you all very much for coming, and I really hope that all of you stay on this journey with us and kind of help grab this brass ring that's being offered here, because I do think there's a big future in it for you. So thank you for coming. Okay, webinar question. With pay for performance, will it be okay to fuel switch? Who would ask that question? Fuel we're still, so the rule in our program is still not to allow fuel switching. I will say this. This year is the first year where I have seen a working group convened specifically to fix this issue. I know we've waved our hands at it for years and we said it's coming. But this is the first year I've seen both the CPUC order it in a decision that it will get decided this year and set a date for that. And they have a working group set up to decide that issue. I don't know where it's going right now, but with any luck, we'll see some relief on this in the coming year. Sorry, that's all I can say. So is that it? Any questions? Okay, great. Thanks again, everybody.
David, the rationing, you just want to move on by hand.